Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our last meeting for this year. Sorry for the delay, but we had technical problems up on the desk and we needed to get that sorted first. So can I also say welcome to all those people who are watching it live streamed, and we need to be aware of it here as well. There'll only be a few very brief announcements before we listen to our guest speaker for tonight. Can I say initially that normally in the past our annual meeting would have been tonight, but since we've adopted our new constitution, our financial year now closes on the 31st of December, which is the same date as our membership year. And so that was one of the primary reasons for wanting to change that. But our Treasurer tells us that there are still many people who have not paid their subs for this year. And so if anybody here or anybody live stream is still to pay their subs, we encourage you to do so between now and the end of the year. This year, particularly with live streaming, there's an additional cost to us, and so we need to have as many financial members as possible. And we also welcome new members, and there's been information up on the screen there about becoming a member. Now, first cab off the rank is Rachel, our archivist, to speak about the book sale.
Thanks, Jeff. So you might have read in our last FoLA newsletter that we have been working through a backlog of deposits of published works, and we have worked through about 75 linear metres of books that have been deposited, and we've now appraised them, worked out what we need to keep in the collection and what we don't need, and primarily that's because we already have copies in the collection. And so what we are doing is we are having a book fair, and it is this Saturday, and we are opening our doors at 9:30 a.m. and closing them at 1:30 p.m. at the archives, and you can come along and you can browse to your heart's content, and you can purchase as many books as you would like. We have between 400 and 500 published family histories up for sale. Some of these are just one copy available, and some of them are multiple copies. We have a section for rare books, and these are really hard to find books, or they're intrinsically valuable books. We have photographs, which are duplicates from the collection, available. There's religious books, so theology and sermons and liturgy books, and then there's also general works as well. So it's going to be a really big day, and if you would like anything, please come along. And in exciting news, we have found one copy of the original edition of Carville's People. So if you would like this copy, we have decided that we are not, to make it fair, because this is a book that so many people are interested in, we're actually holding a raffle for it. And so it's $10 per entry. You're allowed 2 entries, and you can either give me cash tonight, or if you're watching online, you can enter online. Just send us an email or have a look at our Facebook page with how to enter, and we'll be drawing the raffle for the fantastic prize of Carville's People at 1 o'clock on Saturday. You don't need to be at the fair to collect the prize. We'll post it to you or arrange collection, or if you are an overseas winner, then we'll arrange for postage, and you can pay the difference between the Australia postage and the overseas postage. But we have a few entries already, but it's still fair game for anyone, so enter it if you would like a copy, and we hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. So I encourage you all to think positively about coming along to that fair. They've had it in the past, and there's been a very good response and a lot of books sold. Now, Dr. Peter Micken. He wants to make an announcement.
Schönen guten Abend. Es freut mich, dass wir wieder hier zusammenkommen und wir können irgendetwas über unsere Geschichte sprechen. So it's very nice to be here together and to be able to spend some time looking at our history. A very important event is taking place on the 28th of October 2023. So that's Saturday week. So you've got the sale this Saturday. Fortunately, we're not. I'm used to doing this. Fortunately, we do not have a clash. On the 28th of October, there is a world premiere of a piece called Barossa Deutsch. It has been commissioned by the Kegelstadt Ensemble, which is a well-known ensemble here in Adelaide that plays normally Baroque music, but they also play modern music. This is a piece that is commissioned with a composer from Queensland. The composer is Robert Davidson. He has used some of the data and documentation from last 10 years recording of people's stories, recording of their German. So there is a combination of the people speaking German today, that's the Barossa Deutsch bit, but knitted in with and connected with some of the music that we associate very strongly with our heritage, Bach music, various pieces. So I'll just spell out when it is, Saturday the 28th of October 2023 at 2:30 p.m. So it's in the afternoon. It's a nice trip to the Barossa, in the Barossa Regional Gallery Tanunda, Barossa Valley. Now this is a very special event. I mean, the fact, first of all, that a work has been commissioned, that a very well-known composer, in fact, is composing it, and that it has been done with understanding of the whole Barossa heritage and language heritage, and in addition it is being played by a group that is very, very understanding of church music and frequently gives church music performances and other Baroque types of music here in Adelaide. It's very well established. It is something very special. I'll just read a little bit from the news. The centrepiece of the afternoon is a new commissioned work by Australian composer Robert Davidson for live instruments and audio track. Let me just mention the instruments. You know, there's the magnificent organ that came out of the town hall that is going to be played, and there will be improvisations on Lutheran hymns that he's going to play on that absolutely amazingly restored organ. There's a clarinet, viola and cello. And some of the people are very well known. For example, Kim Worley will play the cello. He's the director of music at Bethlehem Lutheran Church. And his wife plays a viola. Anna Webb, very well known musician and teacher here. And it's a very strong group. So played on instruments, live instruments and audio track, and built on the rhythm and melodic contours of the unique and endangered language branch of Barossa German. I wanted just to say one word about German. This is some stuff that just getting ready for publication. Look, Barossa German has been regarded as a joke. Our data, so what we've been recording, and the records that we've got of books and books sold and books read and what people had in their family libraries, show that this was probably one of the better, if not the best, literate community in South Australia in the 1850s and 1860s and 1870s, quite frankly. Anyway, so it's connected with that. Here, this alongside works by Mozart, Brahms and Hindemith, and those are chosen. Now, so it's connected with the history of the German settlement in the area, and Kegelstadt Ensemble. For those of you who know your Mozart, you know Mozart has got a piece called Kegelstadt. So it's a light, entertaining piece. And you will also know, and this is the connection with the Barossa Valley, there is a Kegelbahn, which is a bowling alley and the only old German-style bowling alley that is in Australia. So they are called the Kegelstadt after that piece of music. So I've got some pieces of paper. I'll hand those out so that you've got details. You can book online, but you will be able to turn up. Are there any questions just about that? So Saturday week, in the afternoon, a lovely Saturday afternoon event.
Thank you, Peter. So, look, he's encouraging you all to come to the Barossa again. Now we'll move on to our speaker for tonight, and I'll ask Lois to introduce him.
Good evening. While we're doing the advertisements, just a quick reminder of the Notaria Hermannsburg Choir, which is down here and will be presenting a concert at a very special event in the Barossa on Sunday, this coming Sunday. There will be a special service at Bethany. There will be a concert by the Notaria Hermannsburg Women's Choir, famed around the world by now. And there will be a concert here in Adelaide also by this choir on Tuesday evening at Bethlehem Church in Flinders Street. So you're encouraged to come along and listen to the heritage of, the sung heritage of the Hermannsburg Mission, which is much on my mind this evening as we celebrate the 150 plus 1 years of the Overland Telegraph line. You will remember, I imagine, that a year ago this same week we commemorated the centenary of the death of missionary Carl Strelo from Hermannsburg. And if you know that story, if you've read his story, you will recall also how important the telegraph station was in the last desperate weeks of his life. But you may not know that the telegraph line was also a very important factor in the location of the Finke River Mission, or the Hermannsburg Station. In 1874, when Pastor Heidenreich was the superintendent of the mission, was looking for a site for the mission, for this new mission, he went to see William Goss, the explorer who travelled in this area. Heidenreich and his committee had the idea that they should go to the Musgrave Ranges. And Mr. Goss told them, it's too far, it's too difficult to get there, you'll never make it, it's not a good idea. But he took out a map and marked a red cross on it near the McDonnell Ranges. And he said, the local Aboriginal people here are wonderful, the grass is wonderful, the timber is wonderful, the water is wonderful, and you will be within reach of the nearest telegraph station. And of course, that telegraph station was terribly important during the life of the mission. And tonight we're going to hear how that wonderful project came about from our special speaker, Richard Venus. Richard Venus was by profession an electrical engineer, like Sir Charles Todd, the hero of this great infrastructure project, this wonderful project which he managed to complete in this amazingly short time of just a couple of years. He was a hero in all sorts of other ways. But tonight our hero is Richard Venus. He was an electrical engineer, as I said, for ETSA, and he became interested in the history of engineering already much earlier in his career. In 1970, he worked with some researchers who were working on the supply of electricity to South Australia. And that interest in the history and the heritage of engineering took him then, when he retired in the 1990s, he then joined the Engineering Heritage Society here in South Australia and became its chairman eventually, and also deputy chairman of the Engineering Heritage of Australia. And at the same time, he was also involved in the History Council, was vice president of the History Council, the peak body of all the history associations of South Australia. So he was very involved at that level, but even more in researching, writing, and above all, speaking about the heritage of engineering. One of his projects was a booklet and a guided tour, Engineering the City, about the engineering heritage of the city of Adelaide. It was thought that there was hardly anything left to show, and they were able to prove that there was far more available and still able to be seen today. Beyond South Australia, beyond the city of Adelaide, but certainly involving both of them, this latest project, the Overland Telegraph, has taken him much further and wider and has, I'm sure, involved him enormously during this last year or so that this 150th anniversary has been celebrated. So please welcome our speaker for tonight, Richard Venus.
Hold something. Thank you. Okay, how's that, John? Good, excellent. Where was I? Start again. Okay, yes, the 150th anniversary of Australia's greatest infrastructure project changed the country forever. And given its technical components, it was just amazing how little physical material it took to create this incredible transformation. So let's have a look at the story. This is a photograph I took a couple of weeks ago, looking out of the plane window. That little line up there is the Indonesian archipelago, and we're flying over the Timor Sea. So let's put a little map up there. The aircraft is tracking somewhere between Broome and Derby, heading for Singapore. And down there, 151 years ago today, the ships of the Telegraph Construction and Maintenance Company were desperately trying to find the fault in the undersea cable that was the final link in connecting Australia to the rest of the world. It ran from Darwin through to the end of the island of Java, and about July or thereabouts, it had developed a fault, and they were still looking to find it. So today, the 19th of October, they were getting very close, and on the 20th of October, about midnight, they found and repaired the fault, which now meant that the Overland Telegraph, the wire through the heart that one documentary film called it, was now the final link connecting all of the Australian colonies with the Southeast Asia and through Europe back to home in England. Midnight on the 20th of October, the news came through that the cable fault had been repaired, and the manager of the company inserted this advertisement in that morning's paper that said the cable is now in perfect working order, which means that now from anywhere in the interconnected Australian colonies you could send a telegram back, mainly to home, to England, but also to other parts of Europe and through the Atlantic cable across to the Americas. So that was a red letter day on the 21st of October. It took another several weeks for the people who were working on that project to find their way back to Adelaide, and on the 15th of November 1872 there was a big parade down King William Street. There was a day of festivities taking place in the exhibition ground, which was on Frome Road in those days, and that night there was a big banquet in the Adelaide Town Hall. The Charles Todd, the officers and men of the Overland Telegraph and the great and the good were there. There were hundreds of people packed into the Town Hall, and ladies, you'll be pleased to know that ladies were invited to sit up in the mezzanine hall and observe the proceedings, so you weren't left out. A couple of telegraph lines had been brought into the Town Hall, and the event started at about 5:30, and one of the first things they did was to send a telegraph message from Adelaide all the way to London. And the most extraordinary thing happened. It came through 2 hours after the message had been sent. Now, this is just incredibly transformational, because prior to this happening, the only way that you had of communicating back with home was in writing, in letters and other documents that were carried by ships. So this was the route of the ships. We came around Africa, then came down, picked up the prevailing winds, the roaring 40s, which brought ships. They made their first landfall at a place called then King George's Sound. That's today's Albany in Western Australia. Then the mail would be transferred to smaller, faster ships that would take them first to Adelaide, then on to Melbourne, Sydney, up to Moreton Bay or Brisbane. Now, this could take about 3 months. So just reflect. What they'd been used to is getting a message from England in 3 months. What's just happened in the Town Hall is not a message, but a reply to a message in 2 hours. It's really hard, because we're just so used to mobile phones and immediate communication, to think just how radical this change was to life in the colonies. That was a problem, and they were always looking for ways to speed up this process. This sailing ship is the city of Adelaide, and its fastest recorded trip was 72 days. So that's a little bit better than 90, but still, it's an incredible amount of time to wait for messages to arrive. And despite the fact it's taken that long, what I find quite interesting is the psychology of the community. They have been waiting so long for the ship that when they start to appear out there in the Gulf, people develop, I call the condition male anxiety. That's M-A-I-L, anxiety. They just can't wait to shave minutes off getting hold of those messages that have taken months to get here. Sometimes the ship's called at Holdfast Bay to unload the mail and bring it up the Adelaide road, but sometimes the weather conditions didn't permit safe anchorage, so they went further up the Gulf. So here's the Port River, and on the beach there was a flagstaff that signalled to shipping in the Gulf. This is about where today's semaphore is. In my research, I have not found a semaphore at semaphore, but there certainly was a flagstaff. And what they would do would be to then bring the mail ashore in a ship, put it on a cart, drag it across the Lefevre Peninsula, put it on another boat, get it across the Port River, put it on another cart, take it through here to the Port Adelaide Post Office. That has been demolished, but this is what it looked like in its heyday. And that horse and cart out the front might just possibly have belonged to one of the mail contractors whose job it was to take the mail from Port Adelaide up here to the Central Post Office at Adelaide. Now, this is the tender that was advertised for people who wanted to be mail carters. I don't expect you to read it, but I'll just highlight this little clause in the middle which says that contractors will be liable to a fine of 10 shillings for every 10 minutes late they are in delivering the mail from Port Adelaide. Ladies and gentlemen, the mail has taken 3 months to get here. They're going to be fined 10 shillings, which roughly is about $400 in today's money if they are 10 minutes late. In fact, that was just the general contractors. That's what they got fined. The fellow who took the mail from Port Adelaide didn't have any leeway at all. If he was late, 10 shillings fine. And of course, the same conditions were happening to the other British colonies on this side of the world, India, the Straits Settlement, and around the corner there is Hong Kong. Wind that the ships coming to Australia had. But there was a technical transformation that took place, and that's with these vessels, hybrid cars, part renewable fuel and part fossil fuel. Nothing's new. And these things were independent of the breezes, so they could make their own way, and in fact it led to a shortcut being established that came not around Africa but through the Mediterranean. Then there was an overland connection established through Egypt. They were put then onto another ship, and they could then sail through to the British colonies in this part of the world. Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it then was an important stopping off point, because from there they could load onto other ships that could come down to Australia. So this shortcut through the Mediterranean and Egypt, and then onto the port of Gaul, down to King George's, about 2 or 3 weeks out of that mail service. But we're still talking about weeks and weeks. Then this comes along, another technological disruption, and that's the electric telegraph. And it was first developed to send signals on railway systems, because trains started travelling at dizzy speeds of 10, 15 mile an hour, and you had to have some way of communicating between stations that was faster than the trains. And this is the telegraph. And they found that it could be also used using various codes to represent text messages. So people have been hearing about these things, and what they decided they wanted to do is that the ships have landed at the port. Rather than wait for the mail to be put onto that cart and brought up Port Road, with the telegraph they can send urgent messages directly to the central post office in Adelaide. So what would it take, a horse and cart? A couple of hours to go from Port Adelaide to Adelaide. So they've cut that last 2 hours out of the transmission time down to virtually instantaneous messaging. So the South Australian government decided they wanted to have one of these things, and the plan was to build the telegraph line from the port through to the central area, which was the railway station. They allocated the money for it a couple of years in advance, and then in 1855 they finally had someone appointed who could take charge of the project, and that fellow was Charles Todd. There's Charles and his bride, Alice. They've been married a few months before. Alice was 17 at the time. Charles was about 26, which sort of seems to be fairly common for marriages in that period. And they arrived here on the 5th of November 1855, and by the following February, Charles Todd had that telegraph to the port operating. The colonial government wasted no time. This was just the first step. They were keenly aware of the importance of communication with the other colonies. Again, you had to put letters on ships. That was the fastest way of getting there. And they figured what they wanted to have was one of these telegraph connections across to Victoria. So Charles was the man chosen for that job. There was a certain amount of reluctance to send him to the other colonies. What happens if, hopefully this battery hasn't gone flat. It's a lovely portrait. Get any signals up there, fellas? Right, okay. There you go. Now, if there was a cable connecting this to the computer at the back, we wouldn't have this. Can you just, can we go old school and I can say next slide? He came out here with nearly 3,000 pieces of cargo because he had to bring with him every single thing that he needed to construct this telegraph line, plus some spares. No Bunnings in those days. Everything had to come out here. Plus their household equipment, Alice's piano. She also had a maid called Carolyn. They were on board the ship, the Irene. And Todd also brought with him an assistant, a fellow called Edward Cracknell, and his wife. And Todd's idea was that instead of bringing English staff with him to operate the telegraph system, he would just bring Cracknell as his key assistant, and then they would train local telegraph operators. So that was pretty clear thinking on Charles's part. So, okie doke. So there he is. He's going to be sent to Victoria to talk to his opposite number. A Canadian engineer by the name of Samuel McGowan, who had actually worked with Morse in the United States. He came out here and he constructed a similar project, a telegraph line from the city of Melbourne down to the port at Williamstown. So Todd went across to all the telegraph systems, and Todd was using something called Henry's magnetic system. McGowan was using Morse's system, and Todd recognised that technically it was superior, so they made a critical decision that they would adopt the same technology as did all the other colonies. So we didn't have a repeat of the railway gauge fiasco. McGowan had been working away. He'd been extending the telegraph across Victoria. He got it as far west as Portland, which, if you have a look at it, is more or less the first port in Victoria for ships coming from the west. So again, there's this technique of intercepting the mail and getting the urgent stuff telegraphed through to the city. And it also worked in the other direction. When ships were going back, if you missed getting a letter onto that ship, you still had the opportunity of telegraphing ahead to the telegraph station. So it's all a pretty important part of the communication. He was prepared to extend that line to the border. And the question of exactly where the border is it another one? And I'm pointing the finger at the Victorians again. Todd's task was to get the line from Adelaide to that joining point, and he travelled overland from Portland with a trooper picking out the route for this telegraph. So by the time he got to Adelaide, he knew exactly where he wanted the telegraph to go. That telegraph line had a terminal station. Those of you who know Mount Gambier, this is Commercial Street East, about where the town hall now is. This is the South Australian office, and that's the Victorian office. Remember that the two colonies are separate jurisdictions, and there was customs when you went from one to the other. And this line opened on the 21st of June 1858. It was interesting because the Victorians had complained about the mail ships coming to Adelaide. That was taking days to come up and go back down to the Gulf, so they persuaded the contractors to go straight to Melbourne. And in a way, South Australia was an immediate beneficiary because although the mail had bypassed this colony, as soon as it got to Victoria, the important stuff could be telegraphed back to Adelaide, so that to some extent they made up for that change in the arrangements. And almost immediately, proposals were being put forward to connect Australia to the expanding overseas telegraph, which had now got to the Strait settlements and the Dutch East Indies. And there were similar stories over there. This is the anniversary of the telegraph in India, a couple of years before Australia, 1851, and again it was from a port to a capital city. So here's the picture. The telegraph line is laid through the Mediterranean. There's an overland connection between Alexandria and Suez. Ships that then come across to, the line then came across to India, went overland, then came through here through Penang to Singapore, up to Hong Kong, and another line went down to Batavia in Java. So as you can see, the line is getting pretty close to Australia. All you've got to do is jump over that gap. And for between 1858 and 1870, there were literally dozens of projects. I've spent months trying to put these into chronological order, and it's quite complicated. We can fast forward to 1870, when a company called the British Australian Telegraph Company, or BAT, was formed, and their proposal was to go from the eastern end of Java, and they were going to come across to the Northern Territory. Now, this was the state of the intercolonial telegraphs at this time. In that 12 years after that original line between Adelaide and Melbourne, Sydney has been connected up to Brisbane. There's a connection from Cape Otway across to Tasmania. There's another line, a direct line from Sydney to Adelaide, and the South Australian system has been pushed as far as Port Augusta. So the idea is that BAT's line would come in from Java, land at Port Darwin, then go overland to the Gulf of Carpentaria, and that would connect with the Queensland system, which had been pushed steadily north, and then that was going across to meet it. And the Queenslanders were pretty keen about this, because instead of them being the last to receive the messages that came from the west, now they'd be the first. So that made sense. To cross the Northern Territory, BAT needed the agreement of the South Australian government, because from 1863, South Australia had been made responsible for the South Australian government agreed, to let the company do that, but they had something up their sleeve. John McDougall Stewart had crossed the country from south to north. They now knew that it was possible to cross the unknown centre of Australia. And in fact, Stewart came back and, Peter, you were talking about the conditions around Hermannsburg. There was water, there was grass, and the conditions, in fact, through the centre of Australia were much better than anybody had believed. So the South Australian government said, look, don't bother about making this connection here. We'll build this connection, provided you agree to land the Telegraph at Port Darwin. And I think that was possibly one of the original offers that couldn't be refused. BAT agreed to that. Why wouldn't they? For South Australia, it was a nation-building exercise that would get development through territory. And people laugh about the fact that as an historian, I have to look up dates. I've got a shocking memory for dates, which is why I've written them down here. On the 10th of June, 1870, Charles Todd was told by the Treasurer, John Hart, to make immediate arrangements for carrying out this work. Now, important date, 10th of June. Amongst the arrangements Todd made was popping down to R.M. Williams and getting his Outback kit together. I suspect he enjoyed the opportunity to get out of the office, but apparently the family were less impressed with him in this Outback gear and the riding boots. They much preferred to see him in the suit and looking much more respectable. So 10th of June, Todd's told to start work. 16th of June, 6 days later, the bill authorising this passes Parliament, but he's already had a 6-day start. And on the face of it, it looks relatively straightforward. The South Australian line has been extended up to Port Augusta. The overseas cable is going to come aboard at Port Darwin. Just connect the dots. Oh, and have it finished by the 31st of December 1871. That's 18 months away. Ooh, what could possibly go wrong? Well, it does look fairly simple, straightforward. The technology of the telegraph in those days wasn't particularly complicated. Essentially, the line itself was built of. So there it is. The obvious thing is to make use of the ports where you can land workers and equipment. So they thought they'd build it in two halves, the southern section and the northern section. And they had tenders ready to go. I won't expect you to read it. It's the 25th of June. Todd has been told to start on this project on the 10th of June. On the 25th of June, the tender advertisement's in the paper. How's that for a fast-track project? So it started off well enough. The northern section, which is that little bit up there, a couple of shipping guys called Joseph Darwin and William Darwood tendered for some of the text at the top sections, and another fellow, early colonist John Roundsville, he had a lot of carting contractors, a lot of the coaches that also provided passenger services were run by Roundsville. He must have done fairly well for himself. The family home is the Naval and Military Club on Hutt Street. So that was fine. And then he had second thoughts when it came to actually signing the contract. He decided that it was actually exposed him a little bit too much. So the government had to go back and have a rethink. So instead of having these two sections, they persuaded Darwood and Darwin to take a little bit more of that top section, and that became known as the northern section. The southern section, which went through most of South Australia, and a lot of that was grazing territory, so that was a known quantity. They were going to unknown. The government decided that they would undertake that themselves with their own labour because they thought it would just be too difficult to get people to take that on as a contract. So that was the central section. This is then re-advertised on the 16th of August. Now again, track the time that it's taken to put all these things together. And also bear in mind, sitting over the top of it is this completion date of the 31st of December 1871. So the contractor for this southern section was a fellow called Ned Backett, and he was also an experienced contractor, cartage contractor in that southern section, so he knew the area quite well. So we're ready to get started. This is actually a photograph that was taken somewhat later in the project, but importantly it shows the big sailing ship, which has also got a mast on it, a vessel called the Omeo. That left Adelaide on the 20th of August 1870, and they set sail for Port Darwin, and of course that was the trip that they had to make. But they were up in Darwin, all ready to go, and the first pole of the Overland Telegraph was planted on the 15th of September 1870. And the young lady there in the white dress is Harriet Douglas, the daughter of a government resident. She had the job of sort of packing the earth around the pole. And then off they went, starting to head south through the Northern Territory. The southern section was a little slower to start. The kick-off point was Port Augusta. This is the Telegraph Station in Commercial Street, Port Augusta. That was opened in 1867. The telegraph line went through the eastern side of the Flinders Ranges to Melrose. It then crossed the Flinders and it entered Port Augusta coming in this direction. The Overland Telegraph was going to kick off from this little place just out of Port Augusta called Stirling North. Here's a little inset showing us that the telegraph line was at a place called Minchin Wells. So here we go. We're off and running. We've got Darwin and Dalwood up there in the Northern Territory. They've started the northern section. They're heading south at a great rate of knots, and the reports that come down is that they're making good progress. The southern section, that's well underhand. They're sailing supplies up to Port Augusta, and the work is ready to start on that. So now we're ready to tackle the central section, which is going to be done by the government contractors. So here's a close-up view of the central section, and that was divided into 5 subsections, A, B, C, D and E. The furthest one, E, the party working on that left Adelaide on the 29th of August 1870. They reached Section E, ready to start work, on the 24th of May 1871. So it took them 9 months to get into position to start work on their part of the line. But they're all in place, the planning is impeccable, the working parties are all in state, the stores and material have been ordered, they're being delivered. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, we just have to do it. Well, on the 8th of July 1871, that the contract with these fellows, he has declared void. So basically he sacked the contractors because they weren't making the appropriate progress. Then he's decided he could get on a boat, and it's taken him 2 months to come back to Adelaide and make this announcement. And the reports in the papers, you know, the last report was February, March. They thought things were going along as well as could be expected. So the government had to react again. On the 13th of July, they appointed Robert Patterson, who was a railway engineer, to take over that northern section project. Patterson had 2IC Walter Rutt, another railway engineer. They put together a working crew, and they were ready to depart on July the 25th. The completion date is now only 5 months away. Patterson is offered a bonus of £1,500 if he can pull it off. And he gives it a red-hot go. But the government then makes a fatal mistake. They send Patterson to Port Darwin. So this is Port Darwin, the settlement's being established, that long building with the, I think it's a thatched roof, that's the stables. But when Patterson gets up there, he finds that the very important stock that he needs to manage the project and cart the materials, there have been losses in their transport. He just doesn't have enough resources to carry on with the work. And the previous contractors have already gone some considerable distance south of Darwin, so he's still stuck at Darwin itself. So he sends urgent requests for reinforcements. One request he puts in writing. He gives to the captain of a Dutch ship who takes it to Gaul in Ceylon. It then has to go on the mail service to come back through all of that process, and it reaches Adelaide. It takes about 2 months to get here. He also sends the Darwin postmaster, John Little, in the opposite direction. He sails around into the Gulf of Carpentaria, transfers to another ship, goes to the southern part of the Cape of Carpentaria to a place called Normanton, where he's expecting to find the Queensland Telegraph. He hasn't got there. It's 120 miles away. So he has to find someone who will let him have a horse to ride to where the telegraph is. So in the two directions, basically the messages get here at about the same time. They really need that telegraph, don't they? Just to make Patterson under no pressure, he looks out into Darwin Harbour and he sees the ships of the Telegraph Construction and Maintenance Company landing the shore end of the Java cable in the harbour. The company are getting close to being ready. Patterson's not even ready to start. On the 20th of November 1871, this line was brought ashore, and the line now back to Java, connected through to Singapore. The rest of the world and Darwin is in direct contact of all of Australia. This event took place at the beach. Those of you who've been to Darwin would be familiar with the deck chair cinema. So this is the beach just alongside the deck chair cinema. And the sesquicentennial celebrations kicked off on the 20th of November 1921, where this little interpretive display has been put up on that beach, and you can see it's that photograph on a glass panel, so you can look through it and see where the cable actually came ashore. Down here in Adelaide, some of you would recognise Hart's Mill at Port Adelaide. This is a little steamship called the Young Australian. That was chosen because it was a small side-wheel vessel that could get along the Roper River and ferry stores. And this time the government don't repeat that earlier problem of expecting people to start from Darwin. So we just have a look at the top end here. The line from Darwin has come down here to the vicinity of the King River. So instead of sending people all the way around the peninsula, what they're going to do is come here into the Roper River, and with vessels like the Young Australian, they can get stores a significant 120k or so to a depot here. Then they can come to the line, and they can go back and start on the end of the northern section. And down here, the central section's been completed, so they're starting to work on the northern section from the southern end, so they're going to close through in that direction. Then it rains. And it rains. And it rains some more. The government decided to send Charles Todd along to Patterson, still responsible for the project, but Todd's there to make sure it's on track. That's Todd there, that's Patterson, not looking entirely happy that someone from head office has come up. Can you spot the woman? There she is. It was probably Elizabeth Sweet, who was the wife of Captain Samuel Sweet, who was the captain of one of the supply vessels. So they're quite organised at the depot, but they're marooned there by the floods and the rains. They're stuck there until nearly April of 1872, so they're now 4 months late. However, they've got a plan B. Once they get started at work again, there's this little gap up here in the line, and as that gets closer and closer together, what they can start doing is bridging that with what they call an estafette or a pony express. So telegraph operators were at the head of each section of line. So a message could be telegraphed, written out, given to a horseman, taken across the gap, given to the telegraph operator. And on that basis, BAT placed this ad in the newspaper saying on the 22nd of June that they would be able to supply a service of getting messages back to Europe. And again, I don't expect you to read it, but it's saying these messages are expected to reach their destination in 8 or 10 days. We've come from 3 months down to a couple of months. Now, we've got the hybrid service, 8 to 10 days. That's fantastic, considering what they've been used to. What could possibly go wrong? Well, the undersea cable fails. In a way, that's good news because it's taken the pressure for non-completion off South Australia and transferred it back to the company. The construction crews here press ahead. This little plaque is on the line, and this is the lettering on the plaque that says that at this point, at 3:15 p.m. on the 22nd of August 1872, the line, the Overland Telegraph line, was finally completed. The message had been sent back to Adelaide by about 12 o'clock. Bells were rung, flags were flown, public servants got a half-day holiday, and the Overland Telegraph was announced as completed. Charles Todd had left the depot, and he was working his way back along the line to inspect it, and he was near a place called Central Mount Stewart. That's it there. He was camped on the bank of this little creek called the Hanson. And Todd travelled with a portable relay device which could be connected to the telegraph line. So he was able to then start to send and receive messages, and this is what he did on the night of the 22nd of August, or as I like to say to people, he was texting. So we're now almost caught up to real time. The Telegraph Construction Company is trying to grapple for the cable, find out where the fault was. This engraving was done with a similar exercise a couple of years later, but somehow they've got to find that cable on the seabed and work out where the fault is and repair it. And that was duly done, as I said, on the 20th of October. That's 151 years ago tomorrow, and 151 years ago on Saturday, the Telegraph was open for business. Now that's pretty exciting, but just have a look at the charge for a telegram, £9.06. That, what did I calculate that to be? About $1,300 to send a 20-word message. So you're not going to announce someone's got married. So this is not intended for day-to-day communication, but it's important for government, and more importantly, it's important for commercial undertakings. It's been estimated that in the first year alone, because merchants could communicate directly with markets in Europe, that the improvement in the prices paid for the South Australian harvests was worth something like about £400,000. So it was a pretty important step in the development of life down here. Todd got back on the 30th of October. That's him, back in a suit. You'll be as pleased as his family was to notice that. There's Charles standing there. and he's in the Telegraph or the operating room of the GPO. Now, those of you who've been to the GPO, you walk in on the ground floor where the post shop was, that big open atrium. This is on the first floor to the right. This is the little plan of it. So there's the operating room. And for about 30 years, that was the node, that was the hub of communication between Australia and the rest of the world. Every message coming in or going out passed through that room. What's happened to it now is that those windows have been knocked out to give access to what will be the ballroom or the function room in the new Marriott Hotel. That's the artist's rendering. Through here we've got the 1893 extension, Electra House here, and this will be the entrance to the hotel, which is in this big tower block that's nearing completion. I expect to have that finished by about February of next year. And then, as we were saying beforehand, from that point there was the big celebrations down at the exhibition grounds. I think this is supposed to be Charles Todd here. The artist hasn't given him a beard. I don't think he shaved it off. In fact, I'm sure he did. A fellow here with, I think it's a tuba. Who were the musicians here? Looks like a tuba. That's Herr Schroeder. And his band was providing the marching music for the parade. And that night there was the big banquet in the town hall. And one of the things that happened is that the governor announced on the 15th of November that Charles Todd, and let's see this nice little studio portrait of him, and he is wearing on his lapel, he's been made a companion of the Order of St Michael and St George in recognition. Henry Ayres got a knighthood, Todd got a CMG. It's just interesting to reflect on the CMG. It's interesting how things connect. Those of you who've read the works of Ian Fleming will know that James Bond was given a CMG, and we were all excited last year to hear that Daniel Craig got a CMG. So that would be an interesting trivia night question. What do those three men have in common? We were talking before, Peter, you were asking about stories and what have you. This website has been created by the volunteers. I think it's still being maintained. In it you will find lots and lots of other resources. This section, telegrams, is particularly interesting because that's where we've put original articles that have been written through last year for the Overland Telegraph. Lots of other research for resources as well. You would find it in OT150, that's the website address. Plenty more stories to be discovered about the Overland Telegraph, but thank you again for the opportunity to tell you this part of the story.
Good, thank you. We'll sort of open it up for questions. Perhaps the first one from me, how much did it cost?
Excellent question. Have I got it written down here? £40,000 or something of that order, or £140,000, something like that. Whatever it was about 4 times over budget and 8 months late. But that was okay because, as I said, almost immediately it had an economic benefit for the state.
So have they sort of worked out how quickly they got their money back on their investment and putting it in?
Well, it was a government project and the funds were raised through government loans, and I think it just generally went into Treasury. But if you look at that cost, which came out of the colonial funds, and then you start looking at the economic benefit, the general conclusion was that it didn't take terribly many years before it was of economic benefit to the colony.
Any questions here? A few here. Just wait until I bring the microphone to you.
I would like to know how many people were employed on all the sections, and when it finished, was there an unemployment problem?
There's somewhere, but because of the fact that there were different stages that were built at different times, there were changes in the workforce. Some people just worked on one stage in the 1870s. Some of them stayed on and worked on other stages. On that website, you will find under resources that there is a list of all the people that we could find who worked on the project, and I think it's something like about 800 or so names, but not all of them worked on the project from beginning to end. The other thing that was happening in the Northern Territory as they were digging holes for the poles, they were finding gold. And some people decided that they would want to stay on and chance their arm in the Northern Territory, so not everyone from South Australia came back for that celebration on the 15th of November. And there were some people who come from interstate. The fellow called Joseph Garcia, who was the head wireman, he'd gone back to Victoria. So they came from a number of different places and scattered to a number of different places. But in total, about 600, 700, 800.
Thanks for a very interesting talk. I was wondering, how were all the materials transported?
So you had the two ports at either end, so everything was carried by, well, not everything, most things were carried by ships to either Port Augusta or Port Darwin, and then there were people like John Rounsabell who were cartage contractors, and they had mostly horses and carts. There were oxen. Thomas Elder thought there might be some use for camels in the outback. So once they got to the ports, they came overland. Some of the material from Adelaide was actually taken overland from Adelaide, rather than loading it on a boat and then unloading it at Port Augusta. But most of it came by ship.
So, how far away is the Hermannsburg mission station from the nearest point of the Overland Telegraph?
Not all that well up on my Central Australian geography. You would know from Alice Springs. 125 kilometres. Right. And there's an interesting follow-up. Hermannsburg also features in another interesting communication story, and that's the pedal wireless. And as I recall, the first telegram to be sent by pedal wireless as a link to Alice Springs did come from Hermannsburg.
Was the Udnadatta track opened up as a result of the Overland Telegraph line?
No, that was some considerable distance to the east. The Overland Telegraph went through Beltana, then it diverted to the west to get around the lakes. Then it travelled pretty well due north through Alice Springs, Tennant and Daly Waters. So the track, as I recall, is some distance east.
Are you able to say anything about how the Aboriginal people reacted to the building of the telegraph line? How did they respond? Were any of them involved in the building of it?
Charles Todd was very aware of the presence of the Aboriginal people along the line, and he issued explicit instructions to the working parties about how they were expected to deal with the Aboriginal people, and that was basically to leave them well alone. The impact, of course, is that the Europeans had a different view of water resources. So that was one of the first causes of the conflict, in which there was. In later years, the Overland Telegraph line became a supply route through the centre of Australia, and for a lot of people it became a supply source, and there were people who worked at the telegraph stations in its later years.
At the old telegraph station in Alice Springs, there was a celebration of maybe it was last year that I was at, and one of the local historians, Neil Sutton, was down on the Fink River, and he found a remnant of cable, and it had, I think, Johnson and Johnson. So who manufactured the cable, and was there an Adelaide link with that family that you might know?
I think Johnson and I forget the other partner, one of the English companies who made the wire for the Overland Telegraph. The telegraph, that part of the telegraph was an overhead construction, so it was carried on poles all the way. When it came to the couple of river crossings, there were very tall structures put in place to carry the cables. To carry the wire, the single wire, across the rivers, but I'm not aware of any cables that we used on the line itself. But Johnson's certainly rings a bell as one of the English suppliers of materials.
Okay, any more questions? One more, then we might wrap it up.
I'm just interested about the cable. How big is the cable under the sea, and how did they get it there, sort of thing? That's what I'm wondering.
The undersea link, and if you go to Darwin at low tide, you can still see where that cable comes across the beach. It's about that big. So in the scheme of things, it's about the diameter of the microphone stand. The actual copper cables that carries the signal current is quite small, and then wrapped around that is insulation, and then wrapped around that are steel wires to provide mechanical protection. Then wrapped around that is some more insulation and water sealing material, and then wrapped around that there's a bit more armour wire, and I think there's probably some jute or something wrapped around the top. It was produced by a continuous assembly and extrusion process in England, and it was coiled into the hulls of specially built or adapted ships to bring this massive, great spool of wire, hundreds of miles of it. And the ship captain had to choose a course, and then, as you might recall from that illustration, there was a pulley hung over one side of the ship, and it was just paid out over that, and under its own weight it was expected to sink to the floor of the sea. If they were a little bit concerned about that, they could hook additional weights onto it to make sure it was carried down to the bottom of the sea. And then, of course, when it develops a fault, they've got to find it again. So they had a pretty good idea. The navigators kept pretty good records. So then it was a matter of a bit of luck in grappling for the cable, which is why it took from July through to October to actually find and repair the fault that had taken place. Yeah. Are there any parallels to the NBN? Well, yes, of course there are. And it's been said that The Overland Telegraph was the NBN of the 19th century for its obvious role in connecting people. I don't think it's quite that simple. It's also been called the Victorian Internet because of the way information passed over. The difference, and let's be fair to the poor old NBN, have a look at the speed at which this project was put together. Government said, we will do it, and it will be done. There were no approvals process or analysis processes or environmental impact statements. Susie Herzberg, who was a Todd descendant, has produced a monograph, which is one of the resources on that website, where she makes some comparisons between project management on the Overland Telegraph and today. So, yes, there are parallels, but they're really only skin deep.
What is the current status of that line?
Well, it's been replaced by technology, being replaced by microwave links that started going across the country in the 70s. There was originally just a single wire. A second wire was strung of copper. Copper has a salvage value, so that's been removed. But there are places in the north of South Australia and in the Northern Territory, including around Frew Ponds, where that join was made, where there are sections of the line. And in fact, that photograph of the rusty-looking plaque, you can get to that just in the last couple of years. A track has been put in from the Stewart Highway to that particular part, so you can see where that final join took place. When I was there 11 years ago, I got terribly excited because I saw a join in the wire. And I thought, oh yeah, that's it. Then I thought about it, and I realised that the original wire, is probably part of the original wire, but it's fallen down, and volunteers over the last 40 or 50 years have gone through, picked up some wire, joined them together, put them back on the poles. So yeah, it's a join, but it's not the join.
Good, thank you. And thank you all for your questions. And I'll invite Ivan Christian to move vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Richard. You have entertained us. You've educated us. You, as a technician, have spoken in layman's terms so that we can all understand and join in this learning experience. It's been fantastic. But it hasn't worked everywhere. I'm just thinking up until about 20 years ago, some of the people in bush communities had no contact with the outside world because the people who emptied the coins out of the local phones had not come to take them out so that people could put more coins in. And that was the situation in the bush. About 2 weeks ago, I was trying to send some messages to Hermannsburg. It took me 2 days for the message to get through because there was a power blackout and nothing was happening. No one could communicate. But it was a really exciting adventure, and it's exciting to think that Adelaide was once a hub to communications with the rest of the world. Isn't that amazing? For 30 years, everything was channeled through Adelaide. Before Richard Gates, before Elon Musk, before all of those people who have got us so totally interconnected that we no longer understand each other. You made everything sound so clear, so easy. There's just one line for the message to get through. And the way that communication sped up from taking 3 months to 2 weeks to 7 days for the horse communication, and then down to 2 minutes, and then down to instantaneous is just amazing. So thank you for sharing this journey. We've loved it and we've really appreciated your time with us tonight. I think we'll show our approval. Thank you.
Who got a story not to tell?
Yeah. Now, I think.
But no, there was going to be dancing.
Thank you. This is the first one.
Oh, thank you.
And here's another one.
Oh, God.
I think you deserve it.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, as I said, thank you. It's too good a story not to tell. And thank you for the opportunity to tell it. And the fact that the 19th of October was just within hours of it being the super critical date in the history of the anniversary. And thanks to the guys at the back with the labouring through the technology. It was all a learning experience for us. But we got there.
Good. Thank you, Richard. No, I'm not too sure that anybody else could have portrayed it any better than what you have here. And so this brings us to the close of our meeting and really the close of our activities for this year for the general group. We have still got a committee meeting coming up soon, and I dare say there'll be information in the next newsletter relating to the topics for the early part of next year. And I think the general consensus is that we will have our first meeting in February, like we normally do, and possibly March will be the annual meeting of the organisation. So thank you all for coming here tonight. You're all welcome to stay for supper over in the church hall, and wish you all a blessed Christmas when it comes. Happy New Year, and look forward to seeing you back here again next year. Thank you.
Fires west of Hermannsburg. Apparently it is blowing to the winds are from the east, so the town is safe, but the people in the town have got a bright glow over the town of Hermannsburg.